American democracy has never been a calm river running smoothly from one generation to the next. It has always been a turbulent current, sometimes bending under the weight of conflict, sometimes threatened by forces that sought to reverse the progress it had made. Yet across nearly 2.5 centuries, it has survived, often not because it was inevitable, but because ordinary Americans insisted that their nation live up to its founding promise. To understand why American democracy has withstood turmoil again and again, we must begin not with the myth of stability, but with the reality of recurring crises that have shaped the Republic from its earliest days. The framers of the Constitution did not imagine a peaceful political landscape. They built a system designed to survive disagreement, factionalism, and even demagogues. James Madison wrote plainly that the greatest danger to a republic was the consolidation of power in the hands of those who claimed to speak for the true people, excluding everyone else. The founders understood that human nature does not change, ambition would always clash with ambition, and interests would always compete. Their solution was to create a government capable of absorbing shock, distributing authority, and forcing compromise. But what the framers did not foresee was the degree to which the nation's deepest struggles over race, labor, land, and citizenship would test the Constitution far beyond theoretical debates in Philadelphia. The first great stress test emerged almost immediately as the new nation expanded westward and confronted the question of slavery's place in the Republic. What began as a political dispute quickly evolved into a moral conflict about the meaning of equality itself. The turmoil of the 1850s produced violent clashes, congressional breakdown, and ultimately civil war. Yet even amid the deadliest conflict in American history, democratic principles did not fully collapse. Elections were held, Congress met, courts functioned. And after the war, the nation attempted, however imperfectly, to rebuild itself around expanded rights and citizenship. This pattern repeated throughout the 19th century. The Gilded Age, often romanticized for industrial progress, saw economic inequality soar and political corruption deepen. Monopolies, corporate barons, and powerful trusts dominated the political landscape. Many Americans believed democracy had been hollowed out by wealthy industrialists who used money to control legislation. And yet, from that turmoil emerged the progressive era, a generation of reformers who pushed through antitrust laws, labor protections, and expanded voting rights. The nation again pulled itself back from the brink, not because it was destined to do so, but because reformers insisted that citizenship must mean more than serving the interests of the powerful. What this history reveals is not a story of inevitable progress, but a pattern of Americans confronting turmoil by rewriting the boundaries of political possibility. At every moment when democracy appeared to falter, the people most affected by instability stepped forward to demand change. The Constitution gave them the tools. The crises gave them the urgency. This dynamic conflict, giving birth to a deeper sense of national responsibility, is at the heart of why American democracy survives. The turmoil of our modern era is not new. Polarization, disinformation, political violence, and attempts to undermine elections are not anomalies in American history. They are echoes of earlier moments when groups fearful of losing power sought to reshape the political landscape to their advantage. Understanding these parallels is essential because it reveals a truth that Heather Cox Richardson often emphasizes. Democracy is not sustained by nostalgia or myth, but by the deliberate choices of citizens who refuse to surrender their future to those who distort the past. The survival of American democracy, then, is not a miracle of design alone. It is a reflection of national character, messy, determined, often divided, but repeatedly unwilling to accept authoritarianism as the destiny of the Republic. The question is not whether turmoil threatens democracy. It always has. The real question is whether Americans recognize, as generations before them did, that the strength of the Republic depends on their willingness to defend it. To understand why American democracy consistently weathers its storms, one must examine the historical forces that have repeatedly pushed citizens toward renewed engagement. At the core of this pattern lies a uniquely American tension: the push between inclusion and exclusion, between expanding rights and attempting to restrict them. This tension has generated conflict, but also resilience, because each effort to undermine democracy has triggered a countermovement determined to preserve it. The Reconstruction era after the Civil War illustrates this dynamic with unmistakable clarity. In 1868, the United States took one of the boldest democratic leaps in world history. Formerly enslaved men gained citizenship and voting rights, and Black Americans entered political life as legislators, sheriffs, and members of Congress. It was a radical expansion of democracy, one that terrified those who had long wielded power without challenge. In response, white supremacist groups launched campaigns of violence and intimidation, while local lawmakers engineered legal barriers to strip Black citizens of their rights. This backlash culminated in the abandonment of Reconstruction in the 1870s, leading to nearly a century of Jim Crow policies that enforced racial hierarchy across the South. Yet even this long period of exclusion did not extinguish the democratic flame. Black communities built churches, schools, newspapers, and civic organizations that preserved the infrastructure of citizenship even when the law denied it. The resilience cultivated in those years laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were not gifts from political elites. They were the result of decades of grassroots mobilization, sit-ins, marches, boycotts, and courageous acts of nonviolent resistance. Democracy survived Jim Crow because the people most harmed by exclusion refused to retreat from the promises of the Constitution. This is the heart of American resilience: the power of ordinary citizens to force the nation to remember itself. Economic turmoil has produced similar waves of renewal. The stock market crash of 1929 devastated millions and called into question the viability of capitalism itself. As unemployment soared and banks collapsed, extremist movements gained traction globally. Yet the United States turned in a different direction. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal did not merely address economic collapse, it reimagined the relationship between citizens and the federal government through programs that expanded labor rights, created social safety nets, and regulated the financial sector. The New Deal rebalanced power in favor of average Americans. Even then, backlash followed. Some elites denounced Roosevelt as a dictator, and business-funded organizations launched campaigns to undermine his reforms. But the New Deal coalition held firm for decades, shaping modern American expectations about fairness, opportunity, and the role of government in protecting democracy. The Cold War era added another layer of resilience. Facing threats from authoritarian powers abroad, the United States emphasized civic education, public investment, scientific advancement, and democratic alliances. Though the period produced its own injustices, including McCarthyism and persistent racial inequality, it also strengthened the idea that democratic values must be actively defended, not passively inherited. Across these eras, the pattern remains consistent. Threats to democracy awaken a countervailing force that insists on renewal. The nation's resilience comes not from an absence of turmoil, but from the presence of citizens who refuse to let turmoil define the future. This historical rhythm, conflict, backlash, mobilization, renewal is the engine that keeps American democracy alive. It is the reason the nation has survived slavery, civil war, economic collapse, global conflict, segregation, political violence, and modern polarization. For every movement seeking to constrict democracy, another emerges to expand it. The struggle is never settled, but the persistence of those who believe in equality has repeatedly ensured that even after its darkest hours, the republic finds its way forward. When examining the survival of American democracy in the present era, one must confront an uncomfortable truth. The gravest challenges rarely come from foreign adversaries. They arise from within, from efforts to erode trust in institutions, to rewrite the boundaries of citizenship, and to elevate minority rule under the guise of tradition. Heather Cox Richardson often emphasizes that the modern United States is experiencing a crisis familiar to historians, a struggle between those who embrace a multiracial, pluralistic democracy and those who fear the loss of traditional hierarchies. This conflict echoes earlier moments when powerful groups attempted to restrict voting rights, manipulate information, and concentrate authority. Today's turmoil is characterized by three primary forces: disinformation designed to fracture public trust, political factions seeking to delegitimize elections they do not win, concentrated wealth influencing policy at the expense of democratic equality. The rise of digital media has accelerated disinformation in ways unimaginable to earlier generations. False narratives spread with unprecedented speed, overwhelming traditional gatekeepers of knowledge. The intention is clear. If citizens cannot agree on basic facts, they cannot defend democratic principles. Throughout history, authoritarian movements have thrived when large segments of the population become convinced that the system itself is broken beyond repair. The second threat, efforts to undermine elections, carries its own historical weight. During Reconstruction, paramilitary groups used violence to prevent Black citizens from voting. In the late 19th century, voter suppression laws solidified one-party rule in the South. Today, attempts to question the legitimacy of elections represent a similar challenge. Democracy cannot function when political actors refuse to accept peaceful transitions of power. Finally, the influence of concentrated wealth on policymaking echoes the Gilded Age, when industrial magnates shaped legislation to protect their interests at the expense of workers and consumers. Modern political polarization is intensified by economic inequality that leaves millions feeling excluded and disillusioned. When citizens believe the system no longer serves them, they become vulnerable to demagogues who promise restoration through division. Yet history shows that such threats, though serious, are not fatal. The United States has confronted internal turmoil before, and each time, democracy endured because citizens mobilized to defend it. The civil rights movement pushed back against segregationist governments. Journalists exposed corruption during Watergate. Voters demanded accountability after the Great Depression and again after the financial crisis of 2008. Today's citizens face a similar responsibility. Democracy survives only when individuals reject cynicism and engage with the work of self-governance. The turmoil of the modern era is not evidence of democratic failure. It is evidence that democracy remains contested, meaning it is still alive. The greatest danger is not conflict, but indifference. What sustains American democracy, then, is not blind optimism, but a willingness to confront threats openly and honestly. By recognizing the historical echoes in today's turmoil, Americans can better understand the stakes and the pathways forward. The survival of the Republic will depend, as it always has, on the determination of citizens to uphold truth, equality, and the peaceful transfer of power. If we step back from the individual crises that mark American history, from civil war to economic collapse, from political violence to institutional decay, we see a larger truth. Democracy endures not because it is unbreakable, but because it is repairable. The United States has repeatedly demonstrated that the health of its democracy is measured not by the absence of turmoil, but by the ability of its citizens to respond to it. The most important lesson history teaches is that democracy requires participation. Every expansion of rights, every defense of the rule of law, every movement that pushed the nation closer to its ideals began with individuals who believed their voices mattered even when the odds were against them. The endurance of American democracy rests on this civic faith. Another essential lesson is that institutions matter. Courts, legislatures, a free press, and peaceful elections are the guardrails that prevent the republic from descending into authoritarianism. These institutions are imperfect and often slow to act, but they provide stability in moments of chaos. The framers understood that no system could prevent all abuses. Their goal was to create one flexible enough to withstand them. History also shows that democracy is strongest when it is inclusive. The nation's most stable periods emerged after expansions of citizenship, after Reconstruction's promise, the New Deal's protections, the civil rights movement's achievements. Conversely, the darkest periods followed efforts to exclude, suppress, or marginalize large groups of Americans. A democracy that leaves millions without a voice cannot survive turmoil. A democracy that extends rights to all stands a far better chance. Finally, the endurance of American democracy is shaped by the stories the nation tells about itself. When political actors rewrite the past to justify exclusion or authoritarianism, they weaken the very foundation of democratic society. But when citizens confront their history honestly acknowledging both progress and injustice, they strengthen the republic by grounding it in truth. The future of American democracy will depend on which of these stories prevails. Will citizens embrace the idea that democracy belongs to all, or will they allow fear and disinformation to divide them? Will institutions remain strong enough to weather future crises, or will political actors succeed in undermining them? The answers will not emerge automatically. They will come from choices made by millions of Americans in moments both large and small. Heather Cox Richardson often reminds her readers that history does not move in a straight line. It bends, it breaks, it reforms. Democracy is never fully secure, but it is always worth defending. The turmoil of today may feel unprecedented, but it is part of a long pattern in which Americans, through courage, vigilance, and persistence, have chosen to preserve their republic rather than surrender it to those who would reshape it to serve only a few. The endurance of American democracy, then, is not a mystery. It is a testament to the generations who refuse to let turmoil define the destiny of their nation. And in that long tradition, the Americans of today now stand. The question before them is the same question that confronted their predecessors. Will they step forward to defend democracy when it matters most? History suggests they will. And if they do, the turbulent story of the United States will continue, not as a tale of inevitable decline, but as one of renewed commitment to the promise that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth.